drama and film. And this event is an offshoot in a very broad way of my PhD research, which is concerned with the interaction between oral storytelling and the written word, and particularly with regards to African writers. So before we start proper, I'm just going to give an overview of the evening. So this event is about bringing together two figures who, to my knowledge, have not previously been brought together, and that is Diipo Fagunwa and Peig Sayers. So to begin with Fagunwa, he was born in 1903 and published his first novel in the Yoruba language in 1938. And he went on to write 4 further novels in Yoruba, all of which remain popular amongst Yoruba speakers and are staples of the Yoruba school curriculum, as Peig was obviously for the Irish curriculum for many decades. He died really before his time, at only the age of 60 in 1963, still with ongoing projects and with more to give as a writer. And each of Fagunwa's novels opens the same way, with the hero arriving to the house of the writer, asking if he will record the story of his life, a story which always opens up to reveal multiple other stories. Over the following days, a crowd gathers to hear these tales. And in this way, what Fagunwa's work explores is an interaction between oral storytelling and the written word. I really think Fagunwa is one of those writers whose influence is difficult to overstate, particularly when it comes to the history of the Yoruba novel. So to give you a sense of that, B.C. Ogunshina, in his study of the Yoruba novel, tells us that in the first 20 years of the Yoruba novel, which was approximately from 1930 to 1950, there were only 5 novels published, and 3 of those were published by Fagunwa. I thought I might read an assessment of Fagunwa from the late great scholar Abiola Arele, just to give you a sense of the author. The achievement of Fagunwa has been, by all accounts, a remarkable one. He responded early to the need for a literature in the vernacular at a moment when a new cultural consciousness began to emerge out of a changing social condition. In the sense that he was the first to make a new and significant literature of the language, to have given the oral tradition an extended literary form, he was a pioneer. But the term pioneer is inadequate to describe Fagunwa. In his work, he did more than give new life and effect to the oral tradition which he inherited from his culture. He also created, out of the communal material it offered him, a distinct personal statement in artistic terms upon the issues of human life. So last summer, while I was in the midst of reading and writing about Fagunwa for my PhD, I had the opportunity to visit the Blasket Islands in Kerry, which are so heavily associated with another storyteller, Peig Sayers. And I was struck by the realization that Peig's memoir, Peig a Scéal Féin, or Peig Her Own Story, was published in 1936, just 2 years prior to the publication of Fagunwa's first novel. And that therefore these two towering figures of two different indigenous language literatures were in fact contemporaries of each other, telling their stories at the same time, but many thousands of miles apart. Peig, for those who are not familiar with her, is rightfully considered one of Ireland's greatest storytellers. Her first memoir, which she dictated to her son Micheál, is her most famous work, but she also dictated 350 stories to the Irish Folklore Commission, which are currently held in the National Folklore Collection at UCD. In recent years, there has been an impetus to celebrate and reimagine Peig, who for a long time was associated primarily with Irish misery rather than with a rich and exciting storytelling tradition. And for me, I think Fagunwa's work can be part of this reimagining because I think he gives us a different way to think about Peig. What his work depicts is the interaction between the hero, the scribe, and the audience. And what he therefore celebrates is the transferal of a tale from the hero to the broader world. If we transpose Peig into Fagunwa's work, she is so obviously one of his heroes, telling both the story of her life and the stories of her people to an army of diligent scribes. It is in this spirit that I understand this event too, not as a seminar or as a lecture, but as a celebration, a word and activity which I think is sometimes missing from academic research. So we're going to hear 4 stories today, 2 from Peig, 2 from Fagunwa, and they're going to be read by Dagogo, Hart and Samuel Yakura of the performance poetry collective We Are Griot, who are a collection of Irish and Nigerian poets and storytellers. And then after that we're going to have a Q&A with 2 people that truly I'm honoured to have here this evening, and that is Diipo Fagunwa, who you might guess from the name is a giveaway, is Fagunwa's son and an author in his own right, and the esteemed poet, writer and scholar, Dr. Éilis and Dhuibhne, who has kindly provided as well the translations of Peig's stories that we will hear this evening. So firstly I have a little video on Peig, and then we'll have the first 2 stories, then I have a little video on Fagunwa, and then we'll have the second 2 stories. So I'll just get the video of the Blasket Islands from 1938, just to situate us in time. And then there's a small extract from the 1984 documentary Ilonella. And then there's some silent footage showing Peig in 1946, and just with thanks to the Irish National Folklore Collection for that final piece.
The second of the major books from the Blaskets is that of Peig Sayers. In fact, there are two, a twin set. Her autobiography, Peig, and a companion volume, Machnamh Shanavna, an old woman's recollections. Unlike Tomás Cruthain, Peig Sayers did not write her books. Her son Micheál, a poet, writer, and primitive painter, transcribed her memoirs. The facts of Peig's life are known to many because Peig's autobiography has been used in schools for many years. Peig Sayers was born in 1873, not on the island, but in Ballyvicara, in the parish of Dhuibhne. Her family were not well off. Misfortune attended their footsteps. Peig's mother, Peig Ní Cheallaigh, bore a large number of children. Many died young. Peig survived. Perhaps because she was so young, and in the company of very much older people, she acquired an extraordinary repertoire of folk tales. Peig went into service in Dingle first, and thereafter to a big farm east of Dingle at Knockanvrogeen. After service, Peig had intended to emigrate to America, when her friend Cart Jim Ní Cheallaigh could send her the fare. In the end, Cart Jim couldn't manage the fare. The Sayers' house couldn't sustain a young woman. Sean, Peig's brother, arranged a match. At 18 years of age, Peig married Padre Yogoheen, Patsy Flint, and she went to live on the island. Her husband's health broke. Of her 10 children, 6 survived, and they all followed one another to America. Her poet son Micheál returned after a short while. His health had failed him, perhaps his courage. Robin Flower knew Peig well and collected a lot of folk tales from her. Big Peig, Fágúnwà, is one of the finest speakers on the island. She has so clean and finished a style of speech that you can follow all the nicest articulations of the language on her lips without any effort. She's a natural orator, with so keen a sense of the turn of phrase and the lifting rhythm appropriate to the Irish, that her words could be written down as they leave her lips. And they would have the effect of literature with no savour of the artificiality of composition. Professor Kenneth Jackson, formerly Professor of Celtic Languages and Literature at Edinburgh University, came to the island in the year 1932 to learn Irish and meet Peig Sayers.
Robin Flower said I must get Peig Sayers to be my teacher, and that she had the finest repertoire of folk tales in Corcagwine. He introduced me to her, and I got to know her well. She was a rather tall woman with the most beautiful eyes, violet in colour and triangular in shape. It was easy to see that she had been a beauty when she was young, and in those days was called Peig Wee, blonde Peig, though she was now a grey-haired woman in her 60s. She was a strong character, very unlike the apparently meek, pious, holy woman on the frontispiece photograph in Mary Kennedy's book on her called Peig. She had a tremendous sense of humour and of fun. She was shrewd and could show a sharp tongue when she wanted to. I became devoted to her, almost fell in love with her. I used to call her a Fágúnwà heen, Peig, little mother, and I think she was fond of me. I learned much of my Irish from her, and this is how I did it. I had never heard a word of spoken Irish, but I knew how to use the International Phonetic Alphabet, and I used to go to her every day and get her to tell me one of her great repertoire of long folk tales. As she recited, I wrote them down by ear in phonetics, though I had no idea at first what they meant. Then I read them back to her, and she corrected any mistakes and told me what it all meant in English, which she spoke fluently and correctly. In that way, I soon acquired a considerable vocabulary and grasp of grammar and syntax, and also an abiding interest in the folk tale as a literary and social phenomenon. I published later about 40 tales from this collection called Scialta ón Muscaird, Stories from the Basket. I said just now a social phenomenon, and that is what it was. The village storytellers were the cinemas and wireless of the country people of Gaelic Ireland in those days, and they used to gather in the evenings in Peig's house, old people as well as the young, to listen to her stories, which she told with great skill and expression. I remember well Peig sitting by the fire in the dim lamplight, and the room crowded with half-seen faces, grown-ups as well as children, listening to the stories they may often have heard before, but never tired of hearing.
So we're going to have our first two stories now, so I just want to welcome Sam Dagogo for the first performances. So firstly from Peig, we have a story called Bróbh, which was transcribed by Siosla Dawley in 1948, which Peig heard frequently from her father, and this again was translated just this evening by Éilis and Nigerian. And then we have an early section from Forest of 1,000 Demons, which is Fagunwa's first book, and that is translated by the noble lawyer Móirín.
So I'm going to start off with an excerpt of Peig Saor's work. The title of this one is Bróbh. Don't you see Ní Cheallaigh up there to the north? There was a poor woman living up there beside the leash, and she had 5 children, 2 daughters and 3 sons, and their father was dead. And there were no problems with the children, but they were growing up. The main thing then was trying to pay the rent. And the way they had of getting the wherewithal was with a firkin of butter and a bit of cloth of homespun. But the time to pay the rent was drawing near, and the homespun wasn't made, because she had this to do and that to do, and she could only get a little bit of it done now and then. But one afternoon, she was spinning the flax. And who came through the door but a little scrap of a woman, and she moved into the fire. "Yira vanity," she said. "I can see that you're very busy." "Yira I am," said the woman. "I'm trying to finish this little bit of linen that I have here so I could sell it for rent. And the rent day isn't far off now, and I have to get it done. I think," said she, "that I could do you a good turn as far as that's concerned. I would take the flax and spin it, and I wouldn't ask for any pay at all, only that you would know my name when I've finished with it." "Mwisha, God knows," she said in her own mind, "that I don't care 2 pence what your name is, as long as you spin the flax." But she thought to herself, "I suppose there will be some other botheration once the work is done." She didn't say any of this aloud. It was all in her head. She gave her the stuff and she carried it off. And she took it into the leash. And she was spinning inside the leash. And one afternoon she had it nearly finished, all the spinning. A fine afternoon. And whatever took her up there, the woman from Ní Cheallaigh made, maybe she was after a cow or something. She had a bit of land up there by the leash. She heard the woman inside the leash singing and spinning, and the woman in the leash couldn't see her, and this is what she was singing. "Mwisha, if the woman of the linen, of the linen, of the linen, if the woman of the linen knew that Mare's Tail is my name, she'd sleep sweetly all the same." The ears of the woman cocked up when she heard the song. "God knows, I suppose, that Bróbh, Mare's Tail is your name. and I'd have to keep a good tight hold of that in my noggin. But she learnt it well and off home with her. And it wasn't long until she came in to her with the flax all spun. "Here you are," she said, "and you have to pay me now, the pay I asked you for." "Oh, I wonder what under heaven you might be called," said the woman. "And would you by any chance have been christened with the name Mare's Tail or Bróbh?" "That's right, my friend," she said. "You have my name fair and square. Your part of the bargain is fulfilled, and I will get 7 years of youth thanks to that." If she hadn't guessed her name right, she would have been swept off into the leash, and the woman of the leash didn't want that. I suppose it was the boss of the leash that had sent her out. "She is as graceful as a mare's tail." That's a saying the people have. It's said about a girl who is graceful. Thank you very much.
It all began one beautiful morning. A clear daybreak it was. The Hamatan haze had retreated home. The creatures of the forest were still asleep. Those of the backyard were feeding on the day's providence, and birds were singing praises of their maker. The beatific breeze rustled the dark leaves of the forest, deep, dark, and shimmering leaves. The sun rose from the east in God's own splendor, spread its light into the world, and the sons of men began their daily preambulations. As for me, I sat in my favorite chair, settled into it with voluptuous contentment, enjoying my very existence. Not long after I was seated, an old man came up to me and greeted me. I returned him courtesy for courtesy. Observing what appeared to be a desire to stay, I offered him a chair and turned it to face me. Once seated, we began to exchange pleasantries and share jokes like old acquaintances. It was not very long after when I heard the man sigh deeply as one whose mind was troubled by a heavy thought. Even as I began to consider asking him the cause, he began himself to speak thus.
"Take up your pen and paper and write down the story which I will now tell. Do not delay it another day lest the benefit of it pass you over. I would not myself have come to you today, but I am concerned about the future, and there is this fear that I may die unexpectedly, and my story die with me. But if I pass it on to you now, and you take it all down diligently, even when the day comes that I must meet my Maker, the world will not forget me."
When he had spoken thus, I hurried to fetch my writing things, brought them over to my table, settled myself in comfort, and let the stranger know that I was now prepared for his tale. And he began in the words that followed to tell me the story of his life.
"My name is Yakura, compound of spells, one of the formidable hunters of a bygone age. My own father was a hunter. He was also a great one for medicines and spells. He had 1,000 powder gauntlets, 800 at all, and his amulets numbered 600. 260 incubi lived in that house, and the birds of divination were without number. It was the spirits who guarded the house when he was away, and no one dared enter that house when my father was absent. It was unthinkable. But deep as he was in the art of the supernatural, he was no match for my mother, for she was a deep-seasoned witch from the cauldrons of hell. Once, my father had 9 children, of whom I was the eldest, 4 wives, and my mother was the most senior of them. She had 4 children. The wife who was next to her had 3, the next 2, and the 4th had none at all. One day, my mother and another of these wives had a quarrel, and took the case to my father for settlement. He found my mother at fault, and this so angered her that she resolved to take vengeance for the slight. She became so ruthless in her witching that before the year was out, 8 of my father's children were dead, and 3 of his wives had gone the same way. Thus was I left the only child, and my mother the only wife. Look on me, my friend, and if you are not yet married, I implore you to consider the matter well before you do. True, your wife ought to be beautiful, lest you tire of each other quickly. And the lack of brains is not to be recommended, since you must need hold converse with each other. But this is not the heart of the matter. The important requisite is that your wife should not be prone to evil. For it is your wife who gives you meat and gives you drink, and is admitted most to your secrets. God has created them such close creatures that there hardly exists any manner in which they cannot come at a man. And when I tell you what my father suffered at the hands of this wife of his, you will be truly terrified. It happened one day that my father prepared himself and set off to hunt. After he had hunted a long while, he felt somewhat tired and sat on a tree stump to rest. He was not long seated when, happening to look up, he saw the ground in front of him begin to split and smoke pour upwards from the rent. In a moment, the smoke had filled the entire area, where my father sat so thickly that he could not see a thing. All about him had turned impenetrably black. Even as he began to seek a way of escape, he observed that the smoke had begun to fuse together in one spot, and before he could so much as blink, it fused completely, and a stocky being emerged, sword in hand, and came towards my father. My father took to his heels instantly, but the man called on him to stop and began to address him thus. Can you not see that I am not of the human race? I arrived even today from the vault of the heavens, and it was on your account that I am come hither, my purpose being to kill you. Run where you will this day, kill you I most resolutely will. When he had spoken thus, my father was truly afraid, but even so he steeled his heart like a man and said, Truly, as I observe you, I know you are not of this world, and I see also that the sword in your hand spells mortal danger to me. Nevertheless, I implore you, and I charge you in the name of the immortal God, do not fail to tell me the nature of my offense. The man replied to him, saying, Do you not know that you have grievously offended your Maker? That you have ruined the handiwork even to this extent? That you sent 11 souls to heaven when it was not yet the hour allotted them by their God? These words of his were a great astonishment to my father. For while it was true that he was well versed in magic and charms, he did no one any evil. So he replied to him, If this is indeed your complaint, then your mission is to a different man. It certainly is not I. Since the day I was born, I have never harmed anyone. I do not see a man going about his business and take umbrage at his existence. I do not see a rich man and suffer thereby from envy. When I see a man at his dinner, I continue on my own way. I have never inflicted wounds on any man. I have not shot a man down in my life. So how can you claim my life, and for a crime which I am innocent? He waited for my father to finish his speech, and then he replied, True, you have not with your own hand killed anyone, but you have been responsible for the suffering of poor innocents. With your eyes wide open to what you did, you married a deep-dyed witch for the mere beauty of her body. Is that an act of goodness? Does the blood of your many wives not call out to you? Does the crime against your 8 children not hang around your neck? And despite all of this, do you have the gall to tell me that you have never been guilty of evil? Indeed, there is no remedy. Kill you I must. Only then did my father call to mind the kind of woman he had taken to wife. And so he replied to him, Truly, I see now that I have sinned. I have a wife, whom I cannot control. I strut like a husband merely in name. What I should have done, I have left undone. The path I should have trodden, I have neglected. The creature who deserved to die at my hand, I have indulged with praises. Ah, stranger, stranger from the dome of heaven, forgive me. When he heard this, the man forgave my father and desisted from killing him. But he warned him that he must, the moment he returned home, put my mother to death. So saying, he turned into the forest and continued his travels that way. When he had gone, my father took up his gun and returned home. And it so happened that the path he took led him past a field of okra on the way to the town. It was evening when he came there. The moon was already up. Sorry, I think I'm lost there for a second. When he had gone, my father took up his gun and returned home. And it so happened that the path he took led him past a field of okra on the way to the town. It was evening when he came there. The moon was already up. And coming up to the field, he looked over to the other side and observed someone approaching from that direction. Quickly, he climbed up a tree, waiting to see what this person was about. The figure came on unswerving until it vanished into a large anthill. Shortly afterwards, an antelope emerged from this anthill, entered the field and began to feed on the okra. My father brought his gun to bear on the creature and drove furnaces into its skull. The gun had no sooner roared than there came from the antelope a human cry, and the words, "Ah, woe is me!" That night, my father slept in a little hut by the field. When daylight broke, he went to the spot where the antelope was shot, but he found nothing there, only blood. He began to follow the trail of blood, and it was with increasing astonishment that he found the trail led homewards. He followed it until he arrived right home. But in midtown, the trail vanished completely, and he did not come upon it again until he was nearly at his own doorstep. Then it led him straight into my mother's room. I had not myself slept at home that night. Whenever my father was away, I hated to spend the night at home because the spirits gave one no peace all through the night. Even my mother rarely slept at home, and then only when my father gave his permission. I returned to the house just as my father was opening the door to my mother's room. And when he had opened the door and we entered, that moment when I caught sight of my mother, it was all I could do not to take flight. From her head down to her shoulders was human enough, but the rest of her was wholly antelope. She was all covered in blood and swarms of flies. My father touched her. She was dead and had begun to rot. Indeed, she was the antelope stealing out at night to feast in the field of okra. And so did my mother die. And hardly was a month over when my father also followed her. From that day was I orphaned, fatherless and motherless. And thus ends the story of my parents and comes the turn of my own. Thank you very much.
Stories. I have another video, and this one's on Fagunwa. And this was produced by Clare Ní Cheallaigh, and he was working on a larger documentary on Fagunwa, and he prepared this especially for us tonight, which is sort of a shorter version of the project.
Daniel Olorunfemi Fágúnwà, the man who spoke in tongues with imagery, creativity, and sagacity. Actually, my name is Ojewale Fagunwa. As the Christian name, that's called Diipo. Cultural in the traditional parents, I'm Ojewale. My father is he was now in terms of death, but the name's Daniel from Fagunwa. He actually was Olija. His father was Fagunwa. That Fagunwa was the first name of his father. Christianity was what brought the name Daniel to him, because that was what he was baptized with. I think he was baptized when he was about 13 years old. Gave himself the name Olorun Femi, God loves me, for Christian reasons. He was then going to St. Andrews, Oyo. He was a teacher at St. Andrews Primary School here in Okigbo. And I'm talking to you here from what was my grandfather's house, which was inherited by my father. Used to be his house for a long time. He never actually built a house here. Fagunwa wrote for the world to read. He created the heavens, and everyone accepted his creativity as blessings of man to man. His first book is Oju Odeninu Igbo Mole, which Wole Soyinka translated to The Forest of 1,000 Daemons. The second book he wrote was Igbo Olodumare, which Wole Soyinka also translated to The Forest of Olodumare. The third book was The Expedition to the Mount of Thought, which was translated by Dapo Adeniyi as the third saga. And this was Emekenido Nigbo Elegebeje. The fourth book was Ireke Onibudo, which with title was left as it is, but translated by Alonge Azikolushola. And the final book was Aditu Olodumare, translated by Oluobafemi as The Mysteries of God.
And I guess the way I encountered Fagunwa was when I was in my undergrad. I did a module on African literature, and we studied Tutuola, and I got really into Amos Tutuola and his work. And then I was reading about him, and everyone kept saying, oh, you're into Tutuola, you really need to read Fagunwa. So then I started reading Fagunwa, and now he's kind of a central part of my PhD. So I'm looking at writers who have different ways of being authors, writers who are, like in Fagunwa's case, they've got one foot in oral storytelling and they've got one foot in kind of written textual forms, and how they manage to kind of bring those two worlds together. So that's why I'm interested in him.
Yes, this is Dio Fagunwa's grave. He was buried here with his wife, Elizabeth Agondanke. She died 55 years after. And this is the gravestone. It is just dedicated today, the 10th of December is 60 years after he was born. The same date in 1960, 10th December. Here. A few had said that his body was not found, that he was washed away by the waters of the sea. No, here he was buried.
Àjẹ́dìran. Bẹ́ẹ̀ni. Olúwayé ló kọ tèmi. Olúwayé. Bẹ́ẹ̀ni Olúwayé. Ojú ìjọ bí pé mo mọ̀. Bẹ́ẹ̀ni. Bó ti ń ṣe o. Ló ń ṣe mí náà.
In Bróbh, you see, when they were going to Okelangbodo, the sojourners, the hunters who were going, when they were leaving, they went through Igbonla. Igbonla was where Akarogo went to pick this gentleman, the Kakuni Kumeko, on his wedding day. And Kakumule killed his wife on that day because he felt the wife was disturbing him from Yes, from joining those guys who are going for the sojourn.
Fagunwa represents a very selfless person who also was an educationist, and he marked the beginning of folkloric literature in Nigeria.
So, and according to Fágúnwà in that book, Igbola had more dangerous animals than Igborumole. But Igbola had more dangerous spirits, goblins, fairies, than Igbola. And those would have influenced his writings, because you can see when he was mentioning all those things.
Okay, èmi àdìtú. Kí ló kọ rẹ?
Èmi àdìtú Olódùmarè.
O jí ní kùtùkùtù òwúrọ̀.
Èmi àdìtú Olódùmarè. Olórí burúkú ọkùnrin. Mo jí ní kùtùkùtù òwúrọ̀. Mo gbé igbá olè lórí. Mo gbé tọlọ́sà ka àtàrí. Gbogbo ẹgbẹ́ mi ń ṣiṣẹ́, mo ní olè lèmi fẹ́ máa jà.
His first book, Ogboju Odeno Gborumole, translated as The Forest of Thousand Demons, is the story of a valiant hunter who was born by a valiant father but had a mother who was a witch. The valiant hunter Akarogu went on 2 sojourns to the forest of the thousand demons, Igbo Irumole, and finally was sent by the king of his town to head an expedition to Kilangudu. The story was about his sojourns and his different encounters. Those who are going to Kilangudu, you climbed about 13 stairs to get to the top of Okilangbudu. And on the Okilangbudu, while climbing it, I can remember you reach a place called Aginju Dakeroro. And when I was there, because I've been there myself, that was the most quiet place I have been to in my life. Dakeroro is quiet, means quiet. So Aginju is a wilderness of quietness, or quiet. And that's the most quiet place I've been to in my life. It's the top of the hill. I think it's on the 4th or 5th floor. And I remember from there I made a call, an international call to England to inform my wife, look, I'm speaking from Okelanguyu in Aginju Dakero. And just before Aginju Dakero, there's a place called Ogma in Isale, you will see, which is a bottomless pit. Ogbon is like a dungeon, it's a pit. Initially bottomless. When I went towards the place, I was advised not to go because no humans ever been to that side. I think it's a cliff hanger, and you want to have to be quite careful there because nobody has explored it. It's not that it's not. I don't think it's unexplorable, but you know, if you fall to the other side, nobody's ever done that and survived. That must be what the village in Bolodumare had. And somewhere around there, you have this, on the side, the rock there, where it was touted that Dhuibhne lived. I'm sure they had a python there before, which must have nourished a very dangerous python. It must have been a big one. It must have nourished the myth of Dhuibhne in the Fagunwa. This place was his place in Okigbo. He was about building his own structure when he died. He actually laid the foundation. I think it was a few weeks after that he died, after I laid the foundation. Well, the place is a little abandoned. The plan is actually to refurbish it. Quite a few, that these chairs are there, are those I know were there originally. So it's a very refurbish it and turn it over as an Okigbo museum for Dio Fágúnwà. So when he died, I remember very well, I'm trying not to get it wrong because I saw they actually let him stay in this house. And when it was taken out of this, I remember the drummers started the drums there before they took him out. And then they moved his coffin out. He was lying in state here, not there. He was lying in state here. I was sitting on one of the chairs there. I saw them turning over his shroud. Some when they were doing his shroud, I saw them. I was very young, but I can remember vividly those who were doing his shroud. They were turning him over, and then they moved him out of the house. The drummers here met the house that took him to the church, and later Igolomo came out with his axe, and that was the end of the great man. He went to church and was buried in his chamber, in his palace, that he will live forever and ever. Thank you.
The first one is a story from Peig called Móirín, which is sort of similar to a Cinderella story. And this particular version was told to Bróbh in 1930. And then the second story is extracts from a chapter of Fagunwa's final book, Dhuibhne, or The Mysteries of God, which was published in 1961. And just a note on this, which is very exciting, is that the dream sequence that you will hear, that's actually Fagunwa's own translation. He was working on an English translation of that book when he died, but because of his very sudden death, it was never published. The reason we have access to it is that the manuscript of it is held in the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. So to my knowledge, I don't think it's ever had a public airing. So that is just an exciting translation for us. So welcome, Sam.
Once upon a time, there was a king of Munster. He was a noble and illustrious king, and he married a noble woman. Not because he loved her, but for her money. And they weren't long married when he started to show his true colors. He hadn't a lot of respect for her. But she put up with that. She kept it to herself. She had one daughter, whose name was Móirín. She was a good kid, the daughter. But as time went on, she, the queen, could see clearly that the king was turning against her. She had plenty of magic and witchery in her, like 100 others at that time. Whatever insults the king threw at her, she got up from the table, grabbed the child and gave her a kiss, and off she went. She went into her own room, and if she did, nobody saw her leaving it. There was a hollum throughout the court trying to find out where the queen had gone, but no trace of her was there to be found. Nobody missed her mother, Móirín. She was 5 or 6 at the time. But as far as the king was concerned, he couldn't care less if she came or went. He much preferred that she was gone from the house. But anyway, Móirín was sad. And she was in and out every day, and the people were saying to her, "Have sense, darling. Your man will come home tomorrow or the next day." But she didn't come home, ever. But one autumn afternoon, Móirín was outside the palace and she saw a nice little animal making its way towards her. She saw that it was a cat, and she went towards it. And if so, the cat made for her, and she was calling, morning, 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 to the little cat. Gently, the cat came to her, and she started ruffling the fur on the back of its neck and stroking it. In she came, and the little cat in her arms. From then on, there wasn't a thing in the house that pleased Móirín as much as the cat. But let me tell you that cat lacked for nothing. He would get a bite of everything that was around the house. Even when she went to bed in her own little room, she had a nice comfy little mat in front of the fire where the cat lay, sleeping till morning. It wasn't long after that till her father married another woman who had 2 daughters of her own. They came to the court, and if they did, they didn't have a lot of time or mass for Móirín. They treated her like shit every single day. But in spite of that, Móirín was growing up to be a real stunner. But one day, the king's son sent out a notice that he was holding a big party in his own court, his own palace, and that every single young woman would have to come to the dance and the party. Whoever heard it or didn't hear it, the 2 stepsisters got wind of it. And if they did, they were busy dolling themselves up all day until evening fell. When they were ready, they set off and left Móirín alone in the house, not a bit happy. But when night fell, the little cat spoke to her. Anish, daughter of the king, he said, go and wave that little wand and you will get a horse and a suit of clothes and everything a fine noblewoman needs. Dress yourself up in it and go to the ball tonight. But don't stay there later than 12 o'clock. Fair enough, said Móirín. She got up and took the wand and went to the tree and gave it a belt of the wand, and if she did, out from the tree came a slender brown steed and a fine saddle on him and a golden ring and a silken suit and a cloak of many colors, and she put on the clothes. And never in your life did you see a princess more lovely and fine and beautiful than she when she was all dressed up. She jumped up on the horse and off she galloped to the court. When she reached the gate, there were servants there, of course, and they held the horse because she had to stop there. She dismounted and went inside. And once she entered, all eyes were upon her. The king's son himself got up, and his heart nearly jumped out of his hand when he saw the beautiful noble princess that had come all alone. He put his arm around her and seated her at the table, where she got anything and everything her mouth would desire. When she had eaten her fill, didn't he take her out and dance with her? And he had no eyes for anyone else in the court for the rest of the night but the princess. And it was time for her to go home. She gave her excuses to the king's son and said she would have to be heading off now, that she wasn't allowed to stay any later. He got up, took her by the arm and escorted her outside, where her horse was waiting. As he went back inside, what did the king's son find in front of him on the path? But a nice little glass shoe that had fallen off the young woman's foot. He picked it up, and if he did, he said in his own mind, Shamusha, he said, I would never marry nobody apart from the woman who this shoe fits. She lost it, obviously. He held it tight, and he paid little or no attention to anyone else who was in the palace for the rest of the night. What are you thinking of the noble lady? The next day, he sent out a proclamation in his kingdom that he had such and such a shoe, and whichever woman, rich or poor, the shoe fits, she would be his wife. The young women of the country were busy washing and cleaning and cutting their nails to see who would be a good fit for the shoe. The king's son went out with a guard accompanying him. He came as far as Móirín's house. Anyway, and just to be sure that a word wouldn't escape from her mouth, didn't the pair of stepsisters decide that they would stick Móirín into a chest in the kitchen. The minute the king's son came in, they got busy trying on the shoe. But the little cat jumped up onto the chest and started to meow. Meow, meow, said he, Móirín in the box and the shoe would fit her nicely. They pushed the cat down several times, but little good it did. She hopped up again. Finally, the king's son noticed the little cat, and he told two of his men to lift up the chest, that maybe there was something under it. They lifted the chest, and there was Móirín herself under it, and she was half smothered. They took her out, and it took nearly a quarter of an hour for her to get her breath back. She was nearly smothered from being in that box. She slipped on the shoe. "Yes," said the king's son, "you are my wife now." "Oh no, that cannot be, king's son," she said. "I don't care," he said, "you have to come with me." "Excuse me then," she said, "give me an hour." She went out the door and up the beech tree with her magic wand in her hand, and the little cat came along with her. She gave the tree a belt with the little wand, and out to her came her slender brown steed with its shapely saddle and its golden reins, and her silken suit and all the rest of it, until she was all dressed up like any young queen. She grabbed the reins on her horse and didn't stop till she reached the door of the court, her own house. "I'm ready now, son of the king," she said. He came to the door, and he saw the beautiful, noble queen in the door holding her horse's reins. His heart leaped with joy. He nearly fainted. He helped her up onto the horse so she could ride on, and he hopped onto his own horse right beside her. And they didn't stop once till they reached his palace. They married, of course. The wedding lasted 7 days and 7 nights.
On that night, I had a sudden dream in which my father, who had died, who had crossed many rivers, who had bade the world farewell, suddenly appeared to me from a very mighty house. His body had transformed completely into that of a very young child indeed. He saw me and called me, as he used to call me when he was on earth, and commanded me to follow him. We entered another big house. As soon as we got inside the house, I began to see many of our household people who had passed on. I saw my elder sister, who died long before my father died. I saw my younger brother and sister, who died when my father was still alive. I saw my maternal uncle, who was a hunter. I saw my senior brother, who was both a politician and an eminent person within the Christendom. I beheld them all. Then my father began to speak thus. My son, my beloved son, my heart has remained with you since I left you on earth. I want you to bring these words to fulfillment when the time comes. Do not forget that I have left the world of misery. I have departed from the world of travails and troubles. I have left your dangerous world behind me. I am in the spirit world here, a world in which no one needs to work before eating. There is no story of planted plantain that yields no fruit. There is no despair about poor yield from the cocoyam here. There is no anxiety at dawn. But my son, you are of the world. You will tarry there for a long time, yet before you join me on this side of the firmament. I am speaking to you through the medium of dreams. Look at the man standing on your right hand. Look at him very closely. Take note of him very well, because he will come to see you one day and reveal to you what those of us on this side want you to do. He too is of the flesh, my son. Ah, my son, commend me to your younger siblings. Those were the words of my father, which came to me in a dream. It was after I recalled the dream and took another look at the man that I recalled that it was this same man that my father revealed to me in my dream. That was how the strange thing occurred. I do not recall any story where two different people experienced exactly the same dream. Yet, this man and I had the same dream. As I narrated my dream, the man was nodding as if to say he too remembered the dream every step of the way. He too had seen me as I had seen him. When I was done with my narration, he then took over like this.
I am Diipo, Olodumare, from the town of Ilakoshe. My father is Obiliaye, and my mother's name is Dhuibhne.
This is how far I can write the story word for word as he told it in his own language. He moved so rapidly from one episode to another that I decided to pack up the business of reporting it verbatim. I asked him to go on telling his story, and that at the end of it all, I will write it down in my own words and in my own language. This is the man's story.
I had a dream. I found myself in a big city too beautiful for words. All roads which the inhabitants walked, and all the walls of the houses were solid glass. And these glasses were of different colors. Some were blue, some were green. And whatever colors the walls on the right and left bore, the ground on which one walked would bear. The houses were all very big, but the most wonderful was the bodies. Of all that one met in the streets were also like glass and transparent, so that if one met a person, one could see through his body and any other person coming behind. In fact, one could see at once 2, 3, or 4 persons following in a queue behind the person that one had first met. I, Aditu, saw many who had died. For those who knew me on earth usually rejoiced at meeting me. Some who were abjectly poor on earth would show me their houses, but their houses would be worth millions of pounds. I was right in heaven in this dream. There was no single bungalow, and none of them had less than 100 rooms. The difference was that a house which you would have felt could belong to a rich man on earth belonged to a poor man, while those you knew as rich would be serving as servants. These servants included earthly intellectual giants, head chiefs of small towns and villages, kings, doctors, important witch doctors, members of the holy orders, important imams in mosques. All these were serving as household servants. None of the houses had less than 50 servants. Each one had only one master. It should not be assumed, however, that all those who were important on earth were mere household servants in heaven. Sometimes, a servant on earth was also a household servant in heaven. A wealthy man on earth was also a wealthy man in heaven. A Christian who was an important member of the holy orders on earth was also important in heaven. And a big imam on earth was also big in heaven. I saw a senior cousin of mine who had died. He was very happy to see his junior relation and was willing to show me where my father was. But he said he would not take a short way to Biriaye's abode, because he wanted to show me many other heavenly things. If he wanted to go by a short course, all that he would do was to talk to the glass with which all the roads were paved. If he did, the glass would ringly convey us to Biriaye's presence in the twinkling of an eye. This man, my senior cousin, then took me into a huge building, a building that was bigger than any on earth. This was the house which the inhabitants of heaven called the house of gratitude. Inside, all the walls were covered by racks with a bag hanging from each. The man spoke and said, "This house belongs to all the inhabitants of the earth. It is the house we call the house of gratitude. And all those bags you see are called bags of gratitude. Each individual on earth has a bag of gratitude, inside which all the thanks the person has received are stored. If a man has plenty of money, how many people has he benefited with that money? How many ungrateful people had he done favor, the thanks for which is expected from God only? How many people on earth had he bestowed presents? All these are stored in bags of gratitude hanging on these walls." After leaving this house, we went to a place known as the Celestial Cockerel, because there was neither sunset nor sunrise in heaven, and there was light every time. It was unusually difficult for new arrivals from the earth to have an idea of time. To this effect, the Almighty God had created a being known as the Heavenly Cockerel. When we entered the house, we saw a man, and we informed him that we wanted to see the Heavenly Cockerel. The man asked whether we intended to walk or not. I, Olodumare, answered in the affirmative, whereupon both the man and the man who was conducting me around heaven burst into laughter. Because for one to walk all the way to the celestial couple's home, one would have to travel for a good 6 months. The building was the tallest in heaven and on earth, and he lived right at the top of it. He was neither to eat nor leave the room forever. This creature had the face of a man, legs of chicken, the head of a cockerel, wings on both arms, and the stature of a man. He did not crow as a cockerel because he had the mouth of a human being. Let me give an example of how he announced the time. It is now 1 o'clock, the 3rd day of the 2nd month, 1956, human calculation. It is now 2 o'clock, the 6th day of the 4th month, 1957, human calculation, etc., etc. After they had finished laughing, they turned to the ground and said, "Take us to the celestial cockerel." As soon as they said this, we found ourselves in the presence of the creature who had human eyes, human nose, but the head of a cockerel. He greeted us well. He welcomed me, and after we returned to where we had been before, when we left the house, I noticed some food sellers sitting by the trays. I therefore asked my cousin to take me there. As soon as I came to the sellers, I said, I do not think you are having what I would like to eat now. All those who heard me burst into laughter. After the laughter, one of them spoke this. Before the earth was, we were. We were right from the beginning of creation. There has never been any food which could not be found with us. What would you like to eat? I replied saying that I would like to eat pounded yam with chicken stew. I had not even said this out before pounded yam and chicken stew appeared before me. When, however, the food seller wanted to lift the dish inside, which the pounded yam was, the bottom got stuck to the tray and could not be moved. The seller then asked, "Have you not left your human body?" I replied, "No, I have not." The seller then replied, "You cannot therefore feed on celestial food. I had thought you had left the earth." After this, my cousin took me to my father. He spoke to the ground, and immediately we were right in front of Obiriaye. I, Aditu Oludumare's father. The end.
Thank you both so much for your hard work. You're done now. So I'd now like to invite Diipo and Éilis to join me here. Use the mic to be sure. So yeah, it's such an honour to have you both here. Obviously I have a lot of questions. Hugh also has a roaming mic, so I might ask a question and then I might hand it over to the audience. We're running a little bit late, but we also started a little bit late, so I might let us go on a small amount. So my first question is for yourself. So I think one of the things that Peig and Fagunwa have in common in their stories is this element of the supernatural. And we have that story about the Lish and Bróbh, and that has, I think, an element of supernatural, but it's quite subtle. I was wondering if you could explain to us what's going on there.
Well, I think some of you might have recognised that story. It is an international story, like a lot of Peigs. It's a version of Rumpelstiltskin, that story that the Grimms have that you know from your Ladybird books. the motif of, the supernatural creature, the little goblin in Rumpelstiltskin in the Grimms version, and the woman from the Liss in Peig's version. So yeah, but it's when you told it very well there. The woman from the Liss seems to have been taken by the fairies who do this sort of thing. When you were describing the celestial vision of heaven and so on, where he's not allowed to eat the food. That's in Ireland we have this belief, and Peig would believe. Peig, I mean, like everybody else at the time, she would have believed in the supernatural, the religious supernatural. She was very religious, as anybody who's read Peig Gaelhain knows, genuinely religious. But she also believed in, you know, the fairies and ghosts and the other world, and probably witchy sort of people. So yeah, so that's really that. What seems to the story is a little bit something slightly off, I think, in it. But what the woman from the list, for instance, it seems to me that she gives the name much too quickly. You know, they don't do. He doesn't do that in Bróbh Stilskin. But the woman who has taken the flax from her and spins it very quickly and so on and so forth, seems to be under some sort of spell, and she's released from the spell by the woman of the house, the widow who is on hard times. By guessing the name, she releases her from her spell. But if she didn't do that, she seems to say that she'd be stuck in the list with the fairies, and that the woman would have been taken as well, although that hasn't been mentioned earlier in the story, but that seems to be what's going on in that story. So no, absolutely. I mean, it is a story where the belief in the fairy faith is expressed very strongly. It's just there. Yeah. Taken for granted.
Yeah. And that word lish, could you explain that? What does that mean?
Well, the lis is what we call in English in Ireland a fairy fort or a fairy rot. You see these hills around the place. They're Neolithic or megalithic tombs. If you go up to Loughcrew, which I happened to do a few days ago, the burial mounds are you know, were believed to be lisses, and they're all over the place, and so not like the ones at Newgrange or Loughcrew, but you see the hills, and the farmers left them alone, as you probably know. They wouldn't you know, they wouldn't demolish them, just like they wouldn't cut down a tree that was believed to be a fairy tree and so on. So that's what this is, and it was a place where the fairies lived. The other people, Medina Ushla, or they call fairies names, not usually fairies actually, but the fairy folk, live in these places, and they can steal babies, the changeling legend, and grown-ups, like this woman, and so on, and take them to the list. But one of the rules is you must not, if a fairy comes and takes you to a list, make sure you don't eat anything when you're in the list, because if you do, you're never going to get out again. Yes, useful information.
Yeah, Diipo, the same question for you, because we heard about the antelope and the witch and that vision of heaven. So what were the supernatural element in Fagunwa, which is again connected similarly to religion as well? What were the influences for that?
Yes, the belief, hello everybody. The belief in supernatural, I think, is cultural in a lot of ways. Back home, please grant me the indulgence of referring to Fagunwa as Baba, because that's what I used to call him. And so it makes it easier for me to discuss him when I refer to him as Baba. But the village where we come from, religion was big, even before Christianity. Note that the first book was written over 100 years ago, about 100 years ago. Baba would have been about 120 now, if he were alive. And when he was born, the name he was given was Orowole. Oro is like, Oro is a cult actually, but it's actually like the spiritual comes in. So in terms of name and folklore, you always believe in that. We also believe in witches and wizards and things like that. They're origins for. And if you read some of his books, you will see in terms where the fight, spirits are fighting human beings, they're changing from spirits to human beings and things like that. So with the folklore, we always believe in the external supernatural. The African and essential Yorubas, we believe, we're very religious, and when you're religious, the thing is that you have a tendency to believe in the world outside you, in miracles, and things happening that are out your range, and hence you find a lot of people praying. When we think about the antelope, it is one of the feeds of the antelope is the okra. That's basic. And one of the things you find in folklore is that the wheat changes. When the wheat changes, it changes into an animal that could feed on the farms. So this time, with Oluwaye Hyde, Oluwaye is the father of Dagogo, saw this lady come, saw it was dark, so he couldn't recognize it was his wife, saw the person disappear, a human being disappear into the ant hill. It's like kind of transformation, and now coming out as an antelope. He actually he didn't know it was his wife, he just thought it was an antelope. So he killed the antelope only to find later that it was his wife. But with the folklore and folk stories, we always believe that supernatural things do happen. And you also find, within the books too, you'll find people pray to what we call Omilo Dhuibhne. And it is Omi is water. And the highs of the government, of the Igbo is like a wandering government. And we believe, with the culture that we've been, the folk stories, we believe that if you met the Omilo Dhuibhne, you'll meet the Omilo Dhuibhne in the morning. And if you're lucky to meet, he will always have a mat. He's carrying around, goes around with a mat. If you're lucky to meet him, he will give you the mat and you become rich for life. So you find a lot of people in the mornings, they are going out and we're looking out for, they will be locking it now. So you see, it's part of this supernatural things that which comes from religion. And and also now it's affected the belief in Christianity and Islam, where people look forward to the supernatural miracles and things like that.
The idea of the witch who can turn herself into an antelope to eat the okra occurs here as well. She doesn't turn herself into an antelope, but into a hare. This smaller animal, also that can run very fast, and it was believed in the Irish countryside in the past, relatively recently, that there were old women who very different from that story, scary story. There were women who had the power to transform themselves into hares, and in the shape of a hare, they would go and milk the cows. So there wasn't stealing food from the farmers, and they were disliked for that reason. And there's a legend, the old called by folklore, the old woman's hair, quite popular in Ireland, where one May morning, so around this time of year, a magic time, a farmer who knows that somebody, or suspects that somebody is stealing milk from the cows because they're not giving enough milk, he goes out, spends the night on guard with his gun, like the guy in your story, and sure enough, along comes a hare and starts milking the cows, and he shoots but he misses, and the hare runs, but he manages to shoot the hare as she runs across the fields. Then he goes into the cottage where this old woman lives, and the old woman is there, but her leg is bleeding because she's kind of transformed herself back into a woman. So it's the same kind of motif.
One of the things I think did happen to Baba was this: he went to St. Andrew's College, Teachers College in Oyo, and they had a very good library, so I was told. If you read most of his works, you'll see there's a bit of Arabian attraction in terms of the way the narratives are narrations. You'll see the influence of the Arab way of traditional stories. And then there's, of course, the moonlight storytelling thing that is quite common there. And within the Moonlight stories, what's always come up when you find this storytellers is that you are always talking about the world outside, what is supernatural. For those who have read The Palmary Card by Ostola, it was about this Alabad chasing his tapa all the way outside to the supernatural. Fundamentally, it's changing a bit now because of modernity. People believe seriously in miracles, and when you believe in miracles, you think of the supernatural things that will happen that you normally would not experience. Hence, I think that's one of the things. And if you've read some of this Arabian literature and African one, most of the stories are about genies, about spirits, about transformation, and many other works where you find human beings transforming into animals or whatever, or spirits, and that's
Yeah, that sort of answers was going to be my second question, which is so I think there's the second story that you picked, Móirín, is sort of a Cinderella version, and you're talking about how the first story is related to Rumpelstiltskin, and then in Fagunwa there's stories that are, you can also find them in the Arabian Nights, you can find them in Aesop's Fables. They're all, it's not, it's diverse, it's multicultural, it's and I think particularly, I'm going to ask this with regards to Peig, we think of her as someone who never really travelled, unlike your father who did travel, and he was much more educated as well than Peig, but she never really travelled, she lived in this remote place, and yet through oral stories you see the whole world in what she, the stories that she had. So was there any story that you were surprised to find there, or how do you think that her, as a storyteller, is connected to the rest of the world?
Well, I think you expressed it beautifully, Clare. She never travelled anywhere. She came to Dublin to hospital once or twice. That was otherwise Dingle. Don't know if she ever even went to Tralee. It was a very confined sort of life by comparison, with the way we live now. But the stories came to her, and they came to her. Peig could read and write in English. She didn't learn to read and write in Irish. So that's how it was. She don't think she read very much. These stories travel around the world. Now that's when we were having the COVID pandemic, it occurred to me that the way the virus spread, this horrible analogy, that's how they spread. They could come from China to the Blasket Island. Now, they took a long time obviously everything was slower before we were flying around the place on Ryanair and in the airplanes, and we had the internet, which is a great spreader of folklore and disinformation and all the rest of it aspects. And some of that is interesting to folklorists, but the way myths spring up, but in the past the stories travelled around by word of mouth, and really when you think about it, it only takes one fisherman or a sailor coming from France or from Iceland or from Africa or wherever to the Blasket and telling a story that he's heard, and if it's a good story they'll pick it up and it'll be told, and they cross the language barriers without the slightest difficulty. You just need somebody with the two languages, and the story will know. And that's how so many of the great stories are what we call international folk tales, and there are some thousands of them, all indexed in the types of the folk tale by Auntie Arna, Stid Thompson, and Hans Luther, the latest version of that great index of folk tales. There are other stories which are just local, of course, but when, and I think we think of Peig Sayers as being of course she left school when she was 12 or 13, and never travelled, wasn't sophisticated in that sense. She's the big storytellers like her, extremely intelligent people with obviously quite extraordinary memories. She had 350 stories have been collected from her. How did she even remember them? But they have this capacity. So they're educated. It's just educated in a different way from us. And she was wise. And I think even in the little story, like the Cinderella story, you get Peig's sense of humour, her compassion for that little girl. You don't often get that in the Cinderella story. Like that. I thought, because when you hear them, you notice things that you don't notice when you read them. I thought it was so great the way she understands that the little girl would be asking every day, "Where's my mom?" You know, and that they'd say, "Oh, you know, she'll come tomorrow." Great sort of little touch, isn't it? That's Peig.
Yeah, thank you. My mom was a big travelled. Before then, I was almost make mention that the 19th century was a time in Yoruba land when there was the wars, and people were taken to slavery. I'm not talking about the transatlantic thing. I'm talking about domestic slavery. So there was a lot of dispersals, and with dispersals come stories, culture, and transfer. And when this comes, they are moderated and modified to suit the where it went. Then Baba also, our village to St. Andrews, Oyo, is about 150 miles, and they would walk, actually truck, until they would travel about the first 70 miles. Take a train for about next 10 and do the rest of the travel on foot. You will see them join them. Those who were, all of them who were in school then, you're looking at the distance, you'll see them joining themselves. I remember when I taught a bit in the university, and I met one of my father's classmates, and he was telling us, my father would bring eba, garis, things that beautiful food. On the way, he will meet friends who would have had the stew, and so they team together. So you're going to bring eba, you're making the person stew. Another one will have okra on the way. So that's it was kind of a division, because otherwise you were carrying too much. Yeah. So and along the line, people had stories to tell about where they're coming from. And in the evenings when they had to rest, because those are the days travel. Things were so safe then that you just needed to see a herd somewhere. You would stay by with the farmer and sleep, and sometimes even the farmer would give you more food. And so most of these things, the moonlight storytelling tradition still continued, which is also nurtured by the fact of the wars, where a lot of cultural movements have been through. And we have these masquerades, the traditional masquerades there, who it's like a kind of ancestor worship, and when they chant, there's the historical chants that are storytelling too. They tell, and the Ifa too. My father was Ifa. Fagunwa is Ifa third. It's Peig. So when you see the Ifa chant is about storytelling many of the time. It's Ifa that divine for, I will tell you a story to advise you to apply what you're saying, to do this, that you should go and sacrifice on this day, and that you need to sacrifice to have success. And different places have their own kind of what we call Iyere, which is the relation which they share, and it also goes that far. Plus the fact that back in school, the storytelling tradition still continued because of this big mixture. There were only two teachers' college down the Yoruba land. One was in Ibadan, the other one was in Oyo. I think I've forgotten the name now, just escaped the one in Ibadan. So there were the only two schools that were available, and teaching was the training profession now. Everybody wanted to be a teacher, and that was it.
Thank you so much. So I might actually, if anyone has any questions, I might actually keep them for the reception. You can chat and maybe tell some stories there. Obviously this event has been in English because that's the common language we all have, but neither of these figures, English was their language of their art. So before we go to the reception, I just was going to ask both Diipo and Éilis to read a little bit in Irish and in Yoruba, and then we'll head over. And before we do that, my very final word is I just want to give a word of thanks to the UCD Humanities Institute for supporting and funding this event. And then I also want to in advance thank our musicians who I think we can hear starting up, who are Éilis, Éilis, Cahill, Tony, Michael and Lucy. So Éilis, just because you're beside me, do you have to go first? Okay.
So, Gomleske, so he was in there to go up introed me Dhuibhne Ashgale the tree Corla. So Tosnin sheet alone commercial. The far Urwan, agus Vishay poster, agus Vishay Sunnasosta, agus the Gapra Gabra Akawan, nach Red Galore, Arrogant again, Conan Case ear. So, Rowan Jarek Shay, agus Vina Poshti, ag Fossus, agus Vishay Begeha alone, agus Vishay Borha. Corsi. So Jared Shay Majina one, agus Dur Chaylan Evan Kayla Mora Tomsha Igdolamach con Posta Alor Ochagan, agus con Arga de Hillav, agus Unskamani Nis Far As, agus Dur Mora, oh, Yon, Cuddy Anime Ganhu, no Himi Goem, ach the Agna Genesis, agus Askabro Lesh, agus the land shade leis an leir fad gotí gur búil sé le fear a bhí ag glórug searbonta agus dúirt Seán go raibh sé glórug post agus dúirt an fear leis bhfuil tarnam agus bí a gobar lumsa ar feadh bliana agus ag dearna mbliana tuaigh mé trí sovereign ditch agus the end Seán é sin agus téann scéil sin ar
This one is in Yoruba, but it's been translated somehow. So it's the food creed in Yoruba. I will read the Yoruba version. Nígbà tí a dé ìgbìmọ̀ ní ọjọ́ náà, a bá àwọn ènìyàn ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ tí wọ́n sọ̀rọ̀ tí wọ́n sá káàkiri nínú ilé náà. Ìgbà tí èmi àti ọba sì wọlé, wọn kò dákẹ́ rárá. Ẹnikẹ́ni kò tilẹ̀ sọ wípé òun rí wa, ṣùgbọ́n nígbà tí ọba kígbe tí ó dìde kúrò tó ní kí wọ́n ka ìgbàgbọ́ nípa oúnjẹ, ṣe ni gbogbo wọn dákẹ́ minimini. Òkú oúnjẹ ni wọ́n. Èmi pàápàá kò gbọ́ ìgbàgbọ́ oúnjẹ rí. Ọjọ́ náà ni mo sì kọ́ gbọ́ wó máa kà ní ìsinsìnyí kẹ́ ẹ̀ máa kà tẹ̀lé mi. Mo gba oúnjẹ gbọ́. Òun ni alákòóso ara, oúnjẹ dídára, a máa mú ara dán, a máa mú egungun le, ẹ̀jẹ̀ aṣàn kákòókò, àìdára oúnjẹ ní ń fa ìsàn lẹ́sẹ̀, ìjẹkújẹ oúnjẹ, ó ń sọ ara di arúgbó, ẹ̀rẹ̀kẹ́ á di jáwálá, iwájú á di gọ̀m̀bù, èdè á di pẹlẹbẹ, gbogbo ara rí kúọkúọ. Mo sì gbàgbọ́ pẹ̀lú pé nínú ìpàdé oúnjẹ ìyẹn ni ó ṣe alága, àmàlà á ṣe igbákejì, ìrẹsì ní igbákẹta, ẹ̀kọ ni aṣáájú, ó sì jẹ́ onírẹ̀lẹ̀, ṣùgbọ́n ọbẹ̀ ni ọlọ́pàá, òun atọ́kùn òkèlè. Ní ìgbà tí iyán ń gbéyàwó, ọbẹ̀ ilá ni ìyàwó. Ní ìgbà tí àmàlà lóbìnrin, ewédú lóbìnrin, ẹ̀fọ́ láyà àkàṣù,
Baálẹ̀ ìlúkó dùndú kò kéré ó jọba sí ìletò Kakanfò ní bẹ́pẹ́ ọ̀gẹ̀dẹ̀ wẹ́rẹ́ la ṣípa ìgbà tí gàrí ń ṣọdún ó pe ẹja sí ìpàdé ó pe ẹran sí ìpàdé ó pe edé sí ìpàdé ó pe ilá sí ìpàdé ó tún pe ewédú sí ìpàdé bẹ́ẹ̀ ni ó gbéraga bẹ́ẹ̀ ni àjẹjù kò sunwọ̀n ìwọ̀ntúnwọ̀nsì ló dára alágbára ní ata àlùbọ́sà àgbájúmọ̀ ọ̀kìnní tòmátì ọlọ́rọ̀ ní ẹ̀gúsí lórí gbogbo ìwọ̀nyí oúnjẹ dáadáa omi dáadáa atẹ́gùn dáadáa
ní ìṣe ara dáadáa.
Let me give you the translated version of this in English. I believe in food. He's the governor of a body. Good food causes the body to shine, gives you a stout bone, and makes your blood flow freely in your veins. Bad food brings disease in your feet. Indecent meats lead bodies to a premature old age. Cheeks puff out pointlessly, eyes become sunken, the pillars of nostril are weakened in their base. Also your leg becomes like broomstick. The flesh of the arms turn flabby. Your front swells forward, not commensurate with the rest of your body, and your buttocks get flat. Bad food brings you a wrinkled face, and you become as a whole crowd of wizened flesh. I am also of the belief that in the community of Bróbh, Panalia must be manned as the chairperson and Amala as his deputy. Rice comes next in the third place. Cornmeal is of the gentle class. He is the leader of mirth. Even so, soup is the police person, for he polices the progress of muscles into the stomach. When pounded yam threw a feast, okra was his bride. And when Amala took a woman for himself, his choice was ewedu. A vegetable was 5 of the wrapped muscle. Móirín, oh Móirín, the beloved betrothed of the compact, and behold the fried plantain lags not behind, is noble in his own right. The roast yam is never squat in sight. He is himself the crowned head of Amles. Pawpaw is war general. The attorney is banana. On the very day Gary made a large feast, he summoned fried fishes, somewhat meat, roast meat, and called on ships. He did not fail to accord okra his due. It was sheer humility which drove him to the doorstep of waiting. Excessive eating is not good. Moderacy is the best. Commander is peppers. Onions belong among the nobility, and handsomeness is the tomato. Well, the wealthiest of all is the melon seed. To coin all of this, a decent meal, decent water, and pure hair gives benefit to your body.
Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you had an enjoyable evening. I think we could all agree we could be here several more hours chatting. So please come across, have some drink and some food and some chat and some...